What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. Just had the privilege of checking out the new Richard Linklater movie, Last Flag Flying. It was the opening night movie at the 55th New York Film Festival, a film festival where I'm going to try and see about 5 or 6 movies. At least I have tickets right now to about 5 or 6 movies. One small grievance, I paid up the wazoo to get a ticket for the opening night, only to find out today that there was a press screening, well ahead of time. So it wasn't the first screening of Last Flag Flying, but at least technically was the first that was open to the public. But it definitely diminished the exclusivity angle just a tad. However, Richard Linklater and most of his cast were there. Lawrence Fishburne strutted out in this red suit that was totally badass. And luckily, the movie was fantastic, and so I rapidly got over my irritation at the press screening that they snuck in right ahead of our own screening. But for those of you who don't know who Richard Linklater is, he is the guy who gave us Dazed and Confused and its spiritual sequel, but he's also the guy behind A Scanner Darkly and Waking Life, as well as the Before trilogy, Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight. I've been a big fan of Richard Linklater for a long time. In person and in his movies, he just exudes warmth and humanity. He's just the all-around nice guy who also happens to be an incredibly talented filmmaker who knows a hell of a lot about film history, and so I'm always in his corner whatever he tries to do. Sometimes he hits a home run, sometimes he does not, and it'll be interesting to see how people react to Last Flag Flying, because this is going to sound like a criticism, but it's not. But as a director in his late 50s, this might be the movie where people finally say that Richard Linklater is starting to get old. This is a movie that's got a more leisurely pace to it. It's about old friends getting old. It just feels like a turn into a mature phase in Richard Linklater's career, which will turn off some people. But if you want, everybody wants some, Last Flag Flying is not that experience. Last Flag Flying is based on the book by Daryl Ponnickson, I believe I'm saying his name correctly. This is the same gentleman who wrote The Last Detail, very famous Hal Ashby movie from the 1970s. And much like how Linklater's movie, Everybody Wants Some, was an unofficial sequel to Dazed and Confused, Last Flag Flying is basically an unofficial sequel to The Last Detail. Very similar dynamic of friends, but not specifically the same characters. There's a lot of overlap, a lot of common ground, but you basically swap out the Navy for the Marines and a few names, and it's a very similar dynamic. But in this case, you have Steve Carell looking up his old friends from the Marine Corps because he just learned that his son has been killed in Iraq. This movie takes place, I think, around 2003 or 2004, the early days of the Iraq War, and he wants his old friends, who he hasn't seen in decades, to join him as he goes and reclaims the body and has a funeral. When it comes to structure and plot and narrative, this movie's very laid back. I mean, it's a pure character-driven piece of just guys on a road trip or guys traveling by train, getting to know each other again, telling old stories, wrestling with their demons. And it's essentially a showcase for the acting talents of the three leads, because Bryan Cranston, Steve Carell, and Lawrence Fishburne they're all three of them are firing on all cylinders in this. Their chemistry is extraordinary. The humor is incredible. This movie's got heart for days. People are going to be sobbing their eyes out at the end. I won't spoil what happens at the end, but it's so moving and so overwhelming that it's going to break some people, and I mean that in a good way. And while I think it's a totally fair criticism to say this movie has a few pacing issues, you definitely feel the full 2-hour running time. I have to say, this movie might be one of the most patriotic movies I've seen in a long time, and that is not in a jingoistic rah 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 let's go to war fashion, nor is it in a let's tear it all down and devote ourselves to morbid self-examination and self-attention. This is a movie about loving your country, warts and all, no matter how fucked up it is, and how even if you're engaged in a war like Vietnam, where you question why you're there, it's all about having your friends back while you're over there. Like, no matter who is giving the orders, no matter which politicians are telling you lies, in the end, it's about the friendship you form in the military and having their back no matter what. And as much as this movie might emphasize the need to look past the lies and justification that we often use to push people into battle, it has a flip side where it recognizes there are occasionally white lies that we need to cling to in order to help us get through a time of enormous tragedy. I mean, there's this incredible, without going into too much detail, there's this incredible scene. The three characters are debating whether or not to tell a woman about their experiences with her son while they're in Vietnam. And when they see how much it means to her to cling to the lie that she was told at the time, that he died heroically saving his friends, which was not the case at all. Bryan Cranston, he's a bit more of a absolutist when it comes to the truth. he starts to realize that even his own obsession with cutting through the bullshit, sometimes he just needs to let it slide. And it's these kind of contradictions that make this movie so interesting. This movie is not telling you what to think about the war in Iraq. This movie is not telling you what to think about the war at Vietnam. This movie is not telling you what to think about what young men and women are told before going into battle. It's basically a ballad about three friends, and we can infer our own conclusions as we like, given the drama as it unfolds. And I feel like at a time where people are so divided politically, where people are just screaming at each other all day, every day on social media and saying all sorts of inflammatory things, I mean, people are just out for blood all day, every day. And I feel like a movie like The Last Flag Flying, it couldn't come along at a better time, where it shows how not everybody can be divided into two separate camps, either being totally jingoistic or totally I hate America. It is possible for people to have nuance, and it is possible for people to have contradictions. It is possible for people to change their mind or for their views on certain topics to evolve. And all three of these characters evolve over the course of their journey. I mean, Bryan Cranston is basically the Jack Nicholson character from the first one. He's constantly telling jokes. He's constantly trying to make everybody have a good time and serve them drinks and that sort of thing. But he has his own arc where we come to see just how much he really loves and values his time in the Marine Corps, and how his friendships that he made there were basically, that was the best time of his life. And Steve Carell, he's basically playing the Randy Quaid character from Last Detail. He's very shy and perhaps a little bit of an introvert, but your heart just goes out to him. And this is a guy who's a widow, and he's dealing with the death of his son, and it's just, he is the emotional core of this movie. And then Lawrence Fishburne is in total badass mode, but even he has his own personal journey. I mean, he is a preacher who frowns upon his friend Bryan Cranston and his sinful ways, but deep down, he still is that guy who is Bryan Cranston's best friend over in Vietnam. And watching their interactions, for me, was just the main appeal of this movie. Lawrence Fishburne and Bryan Cranston are just on fire, and sometimes they're screaming at each other, and sometimes they're pushing each other, and sometimes they're hugging each other, but their friendship is just so sincere and so incredible to watch. So while I freely admit that not all of Bryan Cranston's jokes land perfectly, and while this movie, occasionally you will be feeling the length a little bit, I really intensely enjoyed it. And while I'm probably not going to watch it on repeat the way I did Dazed and Confused, and I'm not going to howl with laughter like I did with Everybody Wants Some, it wouldn't surprise me at all if in a few months' time, come award season, this movie starts racking up at least some nominations, if not some awards. I mean, this term often is used as an insult, but this movie is Oscar bait, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if all three of these guys pick up some nominations. It's also the kind of movie that a lot of aging moviegoers are going to go see and really enjoy, and their teenage children are going to be kicking and screaming and saying, "Oh, it's so boring," and they're not going to get into it at all. So maybe it just shows that I'm maybe getting a little old myself. But also, I just really like seeing the independent filmmakers from my early love affair with movies, basically the 90s, still delivering masterful work. As much as Slacker was one of those iconic breakout 90s indie flicks, or Dazed and Confused became just an immediate beloved cult classic, or the Before trilogy has been embraced by so many people who love very intellectual, philosophical love stories, it's interesting seeing how he continues to do some of the best work of his career. Between Boyhood and Everybody Wants Some, and now Last Flag Flying, three wildly different movies, very compelling, all in their own unique way, all from a director who is knocking at the door of 60 and showing no signs of slowing down. So yeah, as long as Richard Linklater wants to keep cranking out movies, I will keep getting in line to watch them. So the New York Film Festival, it's off to a roaringly good start. Can't wait to check out some more movies. Hope you enjoyed this review and recap. Definitely check out Last Flag Flying when it comes out in November. Hope you'll consider giving my channel a subscribe. I really appreciate the support on this channel. If you want to talk more, give me a shout on Twitter at Colbrax, or just leave a comment in the comments below, and I'll be back at y'all in the very near future. Thanks so much for watching.